saying, yeah, we use this content, but last year we decided to quantify, how much do you guys actually use content to help augment your existing library and help save you time instead of creating it from scratch. So perhaps, Luke, because you were heading up running this survey, can you give us some insights to the results, and then we'll get Joel to perhaps give us his thoughts from Stantec.
Yeah, it was just something that we ran towards the end of last year as we were sort of planning the rest of our year in terms of the clients we were working with. And we ran a survey on the subject of BPM content and received responses from 65 AEC firms, mostly larger ones. And a couple of the objectives we had for the survey was really just to quantify if AECs are in fact using manufacturer-specific content and to understand what value they put on the content being done to a high-quality standard. So the results were actually quite surprising with respect to just how high the figures were. We thought they might be high, but they were higher actually than what we thought. So 93% of respondents said they were using BPM content or building product manufacturer content. And 90% of respondents said they'd be happy to give up their time to provide input early into a product manufacturer content development project to ensure greater likelihood the content will meet their needs. So, we often engage some of our larger AEC clients when we're working with a new product manufacturer to ask them some of the more intricate details about how we're building the library and specific things that we want some feedback on. But we thought that 90% of people, given we know how busy these people are, and a lot of them on the call today, we thought that was really high. So that really just shows how important it is. So I guess the key takeaways of these 2 points are if you're a building product manufacturer, AECs are definitely using manufacturer-specific content, and equally they put a really high importance on the content being done well. So if you're a manufacturer, it's extremely important that you're investing in BIM content, or if you are investing in BIM content, that it's really important that you're getting it created by someone who has an intimate understanding of what AECs require when it comes to BIM content. Otherwise, it's unlikely to be used.
Now, thanks for the insights, Luke, and I guess Joel. It'd be really interesting to hear, you part of, and actually to reiterate, I see the point at the bottom of the screen there, we actually are going to have a full webinar dedicated to what we're going to call the agony and the ecstasy, the good and the bad of manufacturers' content. But because that's not the topic of today, it still, however, be good to get an insight, Joel. How much do you leverage manufacturers' content to save you time? And I guess what's an agony and ecstasy touch on your experience with it today?
Sure, yes. So I think the agony and ecstasy perspective is really tied to the discipline. So I think, for example, while all disciplines tend to use it, we see our interior designers benefiting the most. There's a lot of manufacturing content out there provided by furniture people. And, due to their specifications and some of the things that they do where we may have project requirements for a specific manufacturer model, when you can then go get that piece and you don't have to do anything else to it, and that's what you're going to be using, it's great. However, in some of the other disciplines, say engineering and architecture, sometimes what we really need is a more generic object, something that's not too specific because we have open specifications. And so if you start to use some of the manufacturer content that's too detailed, and you find yourself, not being able to truly represent what you want, or, maybe there's a little bit too much of the nuts and screws and bolts in it, and you just kind of want a generic option to show design intent rather than something that's kind of very finalized and detailed that can't be interpreted perhaps for something else or a similar use.
No, it makes sense, and we have heard similar feedback on that, and we certainly have also seen stuff out there that's modelled down to even the thread on the nut and the bolt. So yeah, I do actually look forward to getting into that webinar. But as you said, horses for courses in building the library. So I think another thing too that you haven't mentioned, but we often hear, is that manufacturers' content often has to be standardised to the firm's content. So makes sense.
Yes, I would strongly urge anybody, whenever we're using a piece of manufacturer's content, before we actually load it into our models, we'll open it separately. Yep. We'll do some testing. If it's parametric, make sure that you change sizes and nothing weird happens when you change the sizes. And then quite often too, when it comes to, showing all those nuts and threads and bolts, sometimes it's a matter of just getting in there and, depending on the amount of parameters that are in there, you know, how heavily it's been locked and so on. Maybe just deleting some of the things that you don't necessarily need, changing the level of detail settings, etc. And, you know, maybe with some 5 minutes of family cleanup, then you can take it down to something that's more suitable for your use, and then also potentially add any additional parameters or make it work with your templates, etc. So while it might not be just ready off the shelf, maybe with 5 to 10 minutes of work, it can still be something that you can take advantage of.
No, I really like that, and I think you're preaching that perfectly, because it's ultimately saving you time, and I think that's a big thing that we aim to with the BPM creation of content, is to how do we save you, you know, 70% of your time, and then you can customize it from there. So some good insights there. Well, moving along, because otherwise we could spend the whole webinar on that topic, and we will in future webinars. I did also want to touch on another piece of the puzzle when you're considering your content for 2017. Is standards, because naturally they fit into the equation for every firm. Because if you aim for nothing, you're guaranteed to hit it. So a standard gives us all something to aim for, and there's lots out there. Again, we have another webinar lined up to specifically talk about that in April, where we'll delve into the specifics. But I guess I wanted to touch on two standards that I've seen as so important over the last 10 years of being involved in content from my perspective, and that is consistency is everything. So regardless of what you do, do it consistency. And my second piece of advice is no matter how technical a standard is, and say you want to go to the nth degree of subcategories and put into view templates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, at the end of the day, in many ways, we've got to keep it simple. And we must view every standard through a lens of what value does each of these standards bring to my project, my team, and ultimately my firm. But, you know, that's my anecdotal thoughts. And before we move on to more around scoping out a content project, Joel, I guess what are your key, or what is your key standard or standards that have really helped empower your firm's productivity over the last year or two?
Yes, so, you know, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I would say when you talk about standards, you know, in addition to what you mentioned, one of the other things is letting people know that these standards exist. Because we could put all these great work into creating standards, but if people don't know they exist, they're not going to use them, and then it's all for nothing. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of cross-office collaboration with large project teams that are spanning multiple offices. So in order to be most efficient, we have to employ standards to maintain consistency, whether it's related to graphics, naming conventions, or templates. And again, you said rightly, this is all to save people's time and make their jobs easier. That's why we do these things. And so if we have a standard, as you mentioned, that's too complicated and, you know, somebody has to spend 5 minutes learning how to use it and read it, likelihood is that they're not going to do it. But understanding also, making sure that we create standards where people are using them to improve workflows, or like as I said, to achieve consistency across the board, those are really important things to consider.
I think you nailed it. We're working with the beauty of human nature and the tyranny. It can be challenging, right? I've seen many standards that are 100-page thick, or even BIM execution plans and the like, but often they unfortunately get ignored despite their best intention. But then a few standards that really help save people time and get them home quicker to the family are much more likely to be adapted. So I think, yeah, you're right. Considering it through that lens of how it affects the business, but then how I guess it's conveyed as well is very important to the team. So I look forward to chatting about that furthermore on another webinar, but we shall move on. So I wanted to today really help look at upgrade projects that have come across our bows at UNIFI over the years, and how we have engaged clients and then framed it and really looked at, you know, how we get these projects over the line to help a company upgrade their content, or even how to have the dialogue so that the project can happen internally and we help potentially very little. But the common things that happen across all firms in all regions of different sizes are these five, and they really are phrased very similar to this. Can you please help us improve our content? We know it's not perfect. Here are some things we want to fix. So they often have an idea of areas they're lacking. You know, that might even be a certain department, like say the interiors or landscape team. What are your thoughts on the highest value items to fix? So given that we see a lot of standards, as Luke alluded to at the start, we do have some good perspective to have those strategic chats about what works and what doesn't. They also hand us a content standard. Now, hopefully it's not a 100-page Bible of standards, but it's at least something we can aim for and discuss. And the next phrase they always add is, we know we don't conform. And then, naturally, how much will it cost? So I guess the two common themes that we always see when we have a upgrade project discussion is what will be most value for us to get right. So in other words, in 2017, if we're starting here at the end of the year, what do you guys think is most valuable? Here's our ideas, but it comes to value. And then naturally, how much will it cost? And I guess for us, it's a question of how do we quantify that. So what I wanted to do is break today into 2 points. One is defining the value. So you have the tools to think about content in a whole new light. If you've been thinking about it from a technical perspective, thinking about it from the business's perspective, which will empower you to chat to management. And the next is what it will cost. So starting with defining the cost, we need to really look at perhaps a few key fundamentals of families. Now, every project, and often a lot of firms struggle with the basics of family naming, type naming, parameter naming, just because it's hard to get that right and consistent. And furthermore, although family naming, type naming, parameter naming is not the difference between good and bad content, it is kind of the underpinning low-hanging fruit that adds value to a family. So I guess I pose the question to you, Joel, before we move on, and put some metrics around, good versus bad versions of family type parameter naming. What is your thoughts relative to the importance of these 3 items in a family?
Well, sure, I would say you cannot overemphasize the importance of this, and I can give you a couple of examples. So we had a project where we needed to change the bed that was being used in a patient room, and there's about 400 patient rooms in this project. So, in theory, this should be a simple exercise. Well, one person will select that bed, they'll do a select all, and make the switch. The task should be complete. Well, unfortunately, because the same bed existed with 3 different names, that didn't happen. So what should have maybe been a 10 to 15-second exercise actually turned into a little bit of a witch hunt, because we actually had to make sure that the bed got switched everywhere because there was 3 different names for the same bed. Similarly, this can extend to type naming. If you've been tasked on a project to place, let's say, some chairs, but then you go to place that chair and there's 5 types with no distinct difference in the naming convention, how do you know which one to place? This gets compounded if maybe the person that you're supposed to be asking or has this information isn't sitting next to you, so they're not in your office or in even your time zone. So now you have to sit and wait or try to figure out what you're doing. And again, you can go for parameters. I mentioned earlier that we collected families, and one of the things that we started to look at parameters was the amount of duplication in parameters. I think we came up with about 400 or so parameters related to length. So, this can start to present difficulties when you use things like schedules, where, for example, if you have a door schedule, you have multiple columns for length or width, because each door has the same information, but it's in a different parameter. And now you have a schedule with several columns, and then people start to implement all sorts of crazy workarounds to get the schedule to look correct.
Yes, I feel your pain, and I know it well. And I think, yeah, you've summed it up. I mean, at times I even, when putting this together, I look at this and go, how important is family naming, type naming, parameter naming? I mean, it sounds really basic. Everyone would have it sorted, but I know from our building product manufacturer content even, it's a challenge to get right, and we get to focus on content creation, but for you guys working on projects live with multiple users, et cetera, with other demands, I can see how this naturally ends up a challenge, and hence why I think it's important to focus on, and hence why we've put some maths around it to start to quantify, okay, what is the cost of those potential time impacts? So to do that, we, again, conducted a little survey. We asked some of our key clients in different regions of the world, approximately what is the billable rate, i.e. what does the client pay for the time of one of your documenters or one of your Revit technicians or whoever's creating the documentation. So in other words, what's their wages, what's their overhead, in terms of the company, and then what's the margin on them? So what does the client pay? So it's not like they get paid $200,000 a year themselves. That's the client fee. And then we thought, okay, let's take that 200,000 US and break it all the way down to a minute, and then let's start to look at that through the filter of good versus bad content. So let's look at this relative to family naming and type naming. So we've set up these next few slides with good in blue and obviously not so good in red. And what we've done is kind of put the outcome of what happens with the good version and the bad, the time cost, the result, and the user experience, and then obviously the billable cost to the firm, the potential gained opportunity or lost opportunity. So I'll explain family name, and I won't go into detail on the other ones, but it'll give you a good context, and you will get these slides later. So correctly named families naturally are easy to find, easy to schedule, and they're a single source of truth. They should avoid duplication, and the best bit is you should be able to find them in 30 seconds, even quicker, I suggest, if you're using our UNIFI platform. And if we translate that to a time cost, you're looking at 85 cents. In contrast, as Joel even alluded to before, a badly named family, well, can be hard, if not impossible to find. It confuses end users and creates witch hunts for that phantom bed, as discussed before. And let's face it, at best case, it could take 2 minutes to find. I know that's only an extra minute and a half, but multiply that out, you start to get some interesting financial impacts to the firm. But worst case scenario is where content gets built again. A classic case might even be that phantom bed Joel's talking about, where they couldn't find it because it wasn't named right to start with. So someone built another one and someone built another one. So not only potentially have you wasted an extra 4 to 8 hours to build those 2 beds by those 2 users, you now have 3 rogues floating around your project in your library. And the scary thing is, if you start to extrapolate that out across the hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of pieces of content in your local and global library, the figures are daunting, because these figures on the screen of, 85 cents versus, say, $416 for 4 hours of effort, multiplied out, is a huge impact on the bottom line. And the bottom line of any firm relates to time, because they're often a fixed percentage fee of a project. So efficiency is so important. So that's just family naming. If we now look at this from a type naming perspective, we see the same kind of things. Again, good type naming means things are easy to find. Users aren't frustrated. We can get them into our project quickly, and the best of it is the type will schedule out and make sense. Bad type naming, you're looking at workarounds. You're looking at struggling to find how the family works. You're looking at users starting to create things like type 1 or Joe or John's type. And that all not only takes longer, it also puts more rogues and bad data in, meaning bad data out. And then if we go to parameter naming, same thing. In principle, if you've got 1 or 2 widths or a bit more definition of what width is, or common shared parameters, or project parameters, or family parameters, whatever your strategic approach is to your standard based on what you're trying to achieve, parameters should take care of themselves when you schedule. But then if they don't, as Joel said, the ad hoc workarounds and things like that start to crop up. And then you have extreme cases that obviously don't happen too often, but where parameter values end up out on site, and they are actually products that are not correctly built. We had a case this morning on our webinar with one of the New Zealand companies, the panelists were chatting to, where she had a vision panel come out on site that was all of 100 mil wide, and it hadn't been picked up. Now, that's an extreme case and doesn't happen all the time, but the bottom line is there are times where big costs happen from parameter values, and it's such a small detail of family creation. So as I said before, even though it's so plain and simple, it can have a big impact. So I guess, Joel, I kind of had to read these slides twice after I wrote them to think, is this for real? Is this bigger an impact? But I guess, Joel, what are your thoughts? I know you've looked at this for a little while now as you've digested these slides, but what's your perspective on the true financial cost to a firm of good versus bad content?
Yeah, simply put, it's huge, and you cited 3 very good examples there for family, type, and parameter. But I think, I'd just like to take a step back and say that creating good content has larger ramifications than those just mentioned in your examples. They can extend to your entire workflow. So for example, in our templates, we have preset filters related to furniture for visibility for FF&E. So these work great if the furniture has the correct parameters in them. But if they don't, then all of a sudden we need to spend time creating new view templates or editing the content to correct the parameters. So in essence, the power of the template has been nullified. So the work that we've gone in to do to develop those templates has been wasted. The ease of use for someone to just simply drag something in and then be able to effectively use and quickly use the built-in stuff that we have has been wasted. And then there's, again, as you said, there's always a million ways to skin a cat. So maybe on this view, someone actually did a view template, but then maybe in this other view, someone used a filter, and so then you have to go and start going through that guessing game. In addition to that, you know, it's, again, as we said, ease of use for users, right? So if we have a bunch of content up on UNIFI and users want to get what they need as quickly as possible, but the naming convention is poor, and so they have to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out, well, is it this one that I want or this one that I want? Then in essence, what they're going to do is to go somewhere else. Nobody wants to have to do something and extend too much effort. Even worse is if you have two extremes where, you know, some content is highly standardized. So let's say, for example, we're really good about putting in the conventions and standards for our tables, but then the chairs, not so much. So if I'm somebody that needs tables and chairs, once again, the tables are great, but the chairs aren't. You know what? I'm not going to spend my time trying to pick the tables that are really good and then going somewhere else to get the chairs. I'm just going to abandon the use of that content altogether, and I'm going to go to some other external source because I don't want to have to be continuously going in multiple places. And so then again, you've lost the ability to use the content that perhaps, you know, you have verified and has the correct parameters and everything like that, but also the cost of you creating that content is, again, not being fully utilized because somebody else is going to some other source to seek their content.
No, I think you nailed it. It's like the deeper you look, the more you see even little things circumventing the bigger things that had the best intention, like view templates and stuff like that. But then it comes back to users' path of least resistance. And if you're ducks done in a row, and as you said, many ways to skin a cat, it just doesn't work. It's a system, and it's only as good as its weakest link. We could talk about this all day, I reckon. Now, just before I move on, I wanted to remind people, if they've got specific questions for Joel or myself, feel free to add them to the questions section in the webinar, and we can answer those at the end. We've set aside some time. So I'll move on. I think we have certainly discussed, you know, there's a value to all of this and a bottom line value to the firm. So I guess that is a really good segue to costing. Okay, great. We've seen value. We can now communicate this to management in new ways, like extrapolating out some of these concepts. But how do we quantify the upgrade project? You know, what are the pros and cons on that? So I guess some questions we really need to start to ask ourselves from our firm is, how are we going to resource it? Are we going to do it all internally, externally, or a combination of the two? How many resources do we have? Are they pulled onto projects this year? What kind of projects? Are our resources skilled in the content aspect, or are they just know how to use Revit, therefore they should be able to do content? What have I got, and how am I going to use it? It's one aspect. Then how are we going to obtain the funding? So what are you going to present to management? How are you going to communicate the current status of where your library's at and why you need to invest in it, like some of the reasons around the assets or liabilities before? Now, when it comes to quantification for resourcing and funding to present to management, what are you going to do? Are you going to guess? Are you really good with Dynamo and can programmatically do it? The bottom line is UNIFI and myself has grappled with this for years, and that's quantifying to a firm and helping them build a business case when they look to outsource part of the work or all of the work, how much it's going to cost and how much time it's going to take. And firms, when we've discussed with them, have had the same challenges internally in terms of quantifying projects. And I think that's many of the reasons why they often fail. It's like New Year's resolutions. You start with the best intentions, but then you get a few months in and you get tied up with day-to-day life or day-to-day projects. So looking at Dynamo, we've done that. We've been there. So in this case, as we're shown on the screen, one thing we can do to quantify is place everyone's family from a firm into a project, get all the types laid out and placed, and then run a schedule. Great, we now know how many parent families there are and how many types there are. But you know what? The challenge is bigger than that, and we couldn't get any deeper, and I'll explain the challenge. So again, using the table and chair analogy, very handy, Joel, you brought that up. Here we've got a parent family, and we'll call it table and chairs, and you might be able to, in the types, you know, have 1 chair, 2 chairs, 3 chairs. And in the Dynamo example, we would get our single family out and the different types. But the thing is, if this family here is made up of a series of nested families, such as the chair, the table, potentially the tabletop, table legs, and those nested families have not been set to shared, they're not going to appear in our schedule using the Dynamo tool. So this means our 1 parent family is actually 5 families if we were to actually upgrade to the nested level and get everything really singing in the database. So if you extrapolate this out hundreds, if not thousands of times, you now start to see why at face value for us externally as UNIFI helping a firm with a content upgrade, or you guys internally, you have no idea really of how big the challenge is accurately. So I guess, Joel, in the context of what we've just covered, do you agree with those sentiments, and have you know, what have been your experience with content upgrade projects to date, you know, internally, externally resourcing, quantifying them, getting funding support? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. You brought up some things that I think everybody will face when they try to take on such an exercise. So, you know, one of the first things we deal with is actually trying to identify all the locations where content actually exists. And again, as I said, we have lots of offices, and we all love to silo our content. So, you know, in each office, there may be a shared drive where content is supposed to go. But then when you look in that drive, there's actually nothing there. And then you have to start digging into project folders, and you'll see that the project folders have all the stuff in it. So, you know, even just identifying where it can exist as you start the collection. So then once you do that, sorting through duplicates, determining which is actually the best. Because if I have chair A, which came from San Diego, and then the same chair came from Houston, but there's subtle differences, well, I need to understand, well, you know, if we're going to do something with this, which one should be my starting point? And, you know, that could take forever depending on the amount of families and the level of detail. Another interesting thing we try to understand is if you're doing this and you have existing content, sometimes it's worth updating or upgrading to make it better, but sometimes the content is so poor that you actually should just abandon it and start from scratch. And that's another exercise that can take a really long time, because if there's been effort put into it to make it to a certain point, you don't want to waste that effort by just starting from scratch. But then sometimes it's like, okay, well, this is so bad or so generic, you can just, you know, should start all over. So these are some of the challenges that we see when we're dealing with this, in addition to the ones that you mentioned. And also, again, I guess the other one is it's very easy to say that we're going to take this exercise on and then try to come to an end result. But given all the variables that we just mentioned, it's really hard to put a stamp on how long it would take. So I think you actually need to determine that as a firm yourself. How much effort are we going to put into it, and what is the end goal? Because we could go looking for stuff all over the place, but if we think that maybe 50% of it is actually going to be replaced, then maybe we don't need to spend as much time looking because we're going to abandon some of it anyways.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think you've nailed it. And I think, and you know, the slides that we're about to show, I guess that same frustration we've shared, and we've kind of looked in-house to see if we can help you guys quantify the challenge and then focus your either internal or external resources such as UNIFI to help you make those changes. And on that note, I'd like to introduce the UNIFI audit tool. I'm not going to go into the infinite details of it, but I just want to let you know that it was an epiphany that we, using our UNIFI cloud, currently analyze libraries that are uploaded to UNIFI so that in the client you can actually see some of the metadata about the families. So we went, what if we actually pulled out more data at a much deeper level of libraries to actually fully quantify the size of a library to help provide an index on where we want to focus our upgrade efforts. And furthermore, can we start to actually run analysis on, you know, family names, type names, parameter names, and then over time, even deeper level? So that's exactly what we've done. So how does it work? I'll summarize this, but naturally we would love to follow this webinar up with a more specific overview of what to expect. But basically you upload your libraries that you want to analyze to UNIFI. If you don't have UNIFI yet, we can give you a free 30-day trial. Once they're up there, we run them through the UNIFI cloud and get all the data pulled out and then put it into an Excel format, JSON format, and start to run some analysis. We then offer a 1-hour free consult to look at the data with you and to chat about your challenges relative to the data, because in addition to uploading the content, we ask for you to send through standards and key areas you know you are wanting to fix. What does it cost? It depends on what you want to do. So the consult's free. The data we do charge for, depending on what format you want it in, and if you want to work with our software team to make it more valuable in things like Tableau or Microsoft Power BI. We also then offer options to partner with us to help you update the content, or you can do it entirely in-house with the data that we provide you. Bottom line, we're here to work with you as you see fit. So just quickly to give you an insight, because I am aware that we've got a lot of questions coming and I want this to keep moving through, is this is the kind of Excel spreadsheet that gets pumped out. This is doors, so obviously a challenging category. But you start to get an idea of what we provide. So things like the family string. So what's the parent family, the nested families, what category are the parent nested families in, family names, type names, parameters. So you'd see all the widths, for instance, that Joel was talking about. Based on this information during the consult, we provide a summary of your category breakup. So where does your family sit? What libraries do they sit in? The size of it. And remember our old friend here that we couldn't quantify? Well, now we can. So as we said, 1 parent family, 4 nested in here. Now we actually get that. This is a real audit result from a library where there was 549 parent families. But it actually resulted in 1,604 total families, including nesteds. And then when you start to look at how many parameters are across both the parent and nested families of 21,000 plus parameters, you start to have some pretty convincing metrics to be able to share with management in the context of what we discussed before around assets and liabilities as to why it's important to the firm to look and get this stuff right. And the audit data provides a real analysis and opportunity and ability to start making some changes and making some assessments, but also to quote accurately either externally or internally. Some of the analysis you can start to do just from Excel is where do things not relate to your file naming structure or your type naming, the old type 1 trick. So I guess given this, and as you can see, we've spent a bit of time and there's a fair bit of computing power going in there. And we also have things like content credits and other framework that you can engage us in the upgrade project. So you only use the time that we spend on upgrading it. I guess I'm really interested, Joel, to get your insights and thoughts, because we've spoken more about the audit tool to you, about the results you get, about how that would help you frame a business case to management, but then also how the data and potentially even UNIFI could help you upgrade and work on some of those mundane tasks that just you don't have the time to do.
Sure, this the UNIFI audit tool, I would say, tremendous. First of all, as you simply said, you can get a truly accurate reflection of what you really have, especially when it comes to nested families. I think the other thing we can quickly see is that we can see trends. So for example, you can start to see that maybe we have lots of door families, but we don't really have a lot of window families. So perhaps we need to focus our content creation on another category or object because we have one pretty well taken care of. Parameters, it's funny, it seems that we always come back to parameters, and you're showing the large number that we have there. But, parameters can play an important role, and I'll give you a simple example in the engineering disciplines. Mechanical and electrical families, sometimes there's common parameters that are used in between those that end up helping with circuiting and scheduling and et cetera. So if I can start to look and see that perhaps the ones that are being used in mechanical families are not the ones that are being used in electrical families or vice versa, this can point out some deficiencies to me that we need to address. And then you get to the graphics, and you talked about senior level management. And I think this is really important because you know, these senior level people are not going to understand, you know, what a parameter is or a type or something like that.
Correct.
But if I can show them that there's a graph that has 15,000 parameters, and I say, you know, really and truly, we need to have 400, and the fact that we have 15,000 is creating all sorts of problems with efficiency, it's causing a lot of rework, and most importantly, liability, then I can get their attention really quickly. Likewise, perhaps, if I can show that we spend a lot of time and effort developing families for the structural discipline, but we don't have that many families for the plumbing discipline, well, what's the reason behind that? We need to start having a conversation with those that are in charge of the plumbing group and understanding what needs to change. Have they not, you know, adapted to a BIM workflow? What are the other obstacles or so on? But again, these are really simple graphics that I can talk to with high-level people and start to build a business case, as you said, for overall improvement of content.
Yeah, it's interesting how you've made the correlation almost to the culture around content and how the different departments within a large firm interrelate or are adopting BIM, that you can actually kind of get that insight from these results. I hadn't thought of that. I guess it would be good to understand too, like one of the reasons why I wanted to go down this route was to provide an index to a library, and I think having the family name, type name, parameter name gives you an opportunity to internally filter down the key families that you might want to update subcategories on, or you know, even change from face-based to non-hosted, or vice versa, because you know that they exist. How valuable do you think it is to be able to scan through, in this case as its base output, Excel, but to actually instruct either internal people or external companies such as UNIFI to undertake tasks relative to a family, as opposed, like a family data and string, as opposed to just sending files?
Yeah, no, that's a great thing, because again, you know, that using this audit tool helps you to easily see trends. And so if we know that we have a specific convention that we're supposed to be using and 30% of the families don't conform to it, and we can quickly and easily change that, that's great. Rather than, again, of course, having to collect them all and looking at them in a Windows Explorer or looking at them in the project browser of Revit, because we dumped them all into one, and then painfully trying to sift through that, or even through a Revit schedule, which sometimes works well, sometimes doesn't. So yes, you know, the data perspective, I didn't touch on that as much, but yes, the power to do these things, as you mentioned, related to indexing and so on, is truly great.
Good. I'm glad. And well, I'm seeing the time, and I can see quite a few questions coming through. So I think I'd like to now push over to Luke. You can give a summary from your perspective, and then, yeah, let's get into the Q&A and go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So, you know, hopefully today's webinar has provided some good ideas on how the task of improving content libraries can be really better quantified to really assist with the planning or to be able to plan appropriately for the year ahead. And so I guess to summarise the three ways that UNIFI can assist with these efforts, you know, foremost, I suppose, to engage us to provide a library audit. It's a free service. If you don't have UNIFI, as Ben said before, we can provide a 30-day trial license so that you can upload all your content for us to audit, which provides some really great insights in itself. One of the things we talk to a lot of firms about is, you know, they have trouble locating all their content. So, you know, providing a tool like UNIFI to be able to bring everything together and put it all in one location to audit it is a really great process in itself. Following on from that, you know, using the UNIFI platform is a brilliant way for firms to ensure content library best practices can be implemented, but probably more importantly, be managed through things like permissions and so forth. And perhaps the most direct way that UNIFI can assist is to engage our content creation team to augment your own internal resources. Pretty much every firm we work with, you know, we don't do, you know, regardless of whatever it is, we don't do all their content work. It's really about supplementing your own internal resources and capabilities. So, you know, there's a number of ways we can do this with a one-off project, ongoing service agreements such as content on demand. A new versatile way for us is what we call our content credit system, where clients purchase credits, and this equates to time and applied to any kind of content needs that, you know, library upgrades, family creation, project overflow, whatever the case might be. and then we provide sort of transparent reporting and tracking of how they're being used. So, you know, ultimately we're here to help wherever you see the most value that's specific to your needs, and just to supplement your own internal capabilities and resources relative to, you know, expertise and time frames. We're just here to help. So on that note, I think we'll go into some Q&A. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box now in the bottom of the screen. So maybe we'll start with one here, which is, what's a good strategy for managing naming of family types and parameters? Maybe I might kick that one to you, Joel, if you're okay to maybe answer that one. You got any thoughts?
Sure, yeah. That's a very good question, and I think it really depends on your firm and your practice and what you do. But I guess, you know, a couple of things I would give you to consider. The first being, you want to keep it as simple as possible. So again, when I'm in that Revit environment and I'm looking at the project browser, or, you know, I'm looking in the type selector, I want to as quickly and as easily as possible be able to identify what something is and where. So if I take a look at doors, for example, you may want to start by looking at, you know, within that family or that set of families using an abbreviation EXT to separate exterior doors versus INT for interior doors. Another thing that you need to check and see is where you work and what units you use. We work across multiple countries all over the globe. Some of our offices use imperial, some of our offices use metric. So when we look at naming conventions, we want to make sure that that information is included in there. Another thing is where the content came from, so that people can understand quickly where it came from. So for example, if it's something that we have that we internally produced at Stantec, we'd like to append an STN in there, so someone can automatically say, hey, this is Stantec content, and at that point, hopefully it's gone through some sort of vetting process, or we know that it's tried and true so that people can use it. You always want to make sure that you create unique names for each family. If you're using a type catalog with the family, ensure that the name of the text file matches that of the name of the Revit family. You want to make sure that you don't use spaces, but you want to use underscores to represent spaces in between names. And so these are just kind of some of the things. But I think, again, also another thing is language. So again, being out of Canada, we have some of our offices that are, you know, in Quebec and so on. So we have to have French. So sometimes there's a matter of appending. So I think really what you want to do is sit down and look at all the variables that you have related to where you practice and everything like that. And then come up with what I would say is a list of designators. And then those designators basically get chained together to have the overall family name. If you look at stuff like annotations, for example, we like to start all our annotations off with a generic anno designator versus symbols that is SYM versus tags as TAG. So those are some tips that I would say to follow.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joel. Actually, while we've got you here, I've actually got a question for you myself, just relative to resourcing content. So, you know, Ben sort of alluded to it before that, you know, creating content, managing content requires a pretty specific expertise. You know, it's a pretty important job. And a lot of firms are really currently grappling with, you know, do we employ content creators that are specifically just to create content? Do we have particular people in the practice that are designated as maybe being, you know, the go-to people for content creation, although it's maybe not their primary job? Do we outsource content? Do we use a combination of both? Do you have any like thoughts and experiences on that? Because I think that's one of the really big things for firms that are moving, you know, ahead this year is, okay, we know we want to do content work. How do we resource that? Do you kind of have any thoughts on and experiences on that?
Sure. I think for most firms, it's going to be a combination of all of the above. Firstly, I don't know very many people that would be happy to sit down and just create content all day if they've been employed through an architecture or engineering firm, because they probably didn't go to school with the dream of doing that. But if you do have those people, by all means, go ahead and use them. As you said, it's highly specialized, so you have to make sure you have the right people that understand the knowledge of putting together a good family, developing that skeleton, doing good with the parameter naming and so on. And so, sometimes those people are not always readily available, and their talents are going to be used in other areas. With respect to external content creation, I think we see that where we have really large jobs where they don't have time and they need this right now, and we can't pull resources from other areas. So again, first of all, we have a good standard. We have to have a conversation with these people, make sure that we sit down. If we have family templates, we're going to send them to them. We're going to give them examples of what we expect, and then we're going to just often let them run. And really what we're hoping for is all we're doing is QA, QC to ensure that they're meeting our standards. But there is a place for that when you just need that content right away, and you don't have time to wait for Joe Blogs to be available in 3 weeks, because that's when he's going to have some time to dedicate maybe 10 hours that week for creating content. So I think it's a mix of all of them. What I, however, would encourage is that if there are people in your firm that kind of have an interest or are good at it, it doesn't hurt to kind of identify those people, because this is a highly specialized skill, and in a right away circumstance, it's always good to be able to say, hey, I can call on this person if need be, and hopefully if I need a family right away, they can create it for me, and I don't have to go through the formalized process or hiring an external vendor or something like that. So I think it's a mixture of all of them to get the success you need when and where you want it.
Yeah, great. That sounds like a very logical approach. And I guess sort of just going back to one of the earlier questions, which was managing the naming of families, types, and parameters. So, once you've kind of decided what you're going to do, how do you kind of enforce that, or how do you manage that is being done properly? What's kind of your process internally when it comes to making sure that things do conform to standards in an ongoing capacity? Do you kind of have like an approval process for things to go into libraries? Can you maybe just sort of share how that works at Stantec?
Sure, yes. So again, there's a couple of things. First of all, it's the communication that a standard exists and making sure people are aware where it is so that they can easily access it and that they understand it. So as they start to create content, by the time it ends up on UNIFI, when they've uploaded it to our albums and so on, then we know that it's meeting all the criteria that we've listed. It is an ongoing exercise. We do kind of have a rating system for content. And whenever something has the STN designator in it, there are certain restrictions as to who can upload and or edit that content within Stantec. So that kind of gives us, control to make sure that we know that that content is really there and it's at a good level. Then as you go down and it may not have that STN designation, then, it's kind of a little bit more of a free-for-all, and then it's just constant reinforcement. So as a BIM manager, as a person that's working on a project, when you're looking through the families in that project browser and you're seeing that things are not meeting the standards, it's up to the team to understand and why it's important, given all the examples that we've had about the amount of time that it takes to switch beds or not knowing what type, to then say, hey, guys, there's something wrong here, we're not following it. Let's take 10 minutes, and let's do some cleanup of our family names and the type names or whatever, because in the long run, this 10-minute cleanup that we have can maybe save us 4, 6, 8, 10, 20 hours later on, because of the cascade effect that it can have as the project grows, as we put more families, as we create more types.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for that answer, Joel. It's really comprehensive, and I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot of value out of that. So that actually brings us to the end of the webinar today. Sorry if anyone else has any questions. I haven't got time to get to them, but thank you for everyone that joined us today. Special thanks to our fantastic guest panelist, Joel. We really appreciate you devoting the time and sharing your, and very generous with sharing your thoughts and experiences today. So thank you very, very much for that. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Great. Thanks, Joel. And for anyone that wants to reach out and ask any questions about our content services, if you had any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today or didn't get a chance to answer them, If you have any questions about our content services, or if you want to arrange one of our library audits for your firm, you can reach us via email, which is sales@unifilabs.com. Please get in touch. We're more than happy to chat to you about anything. Otherwise, please stay tuned for some other upcoming webinars we'll be hosting on various content-related topics. We referred to a few of them earlier on. We're looking forward to those and keeping the dialogue going. And we hope you can join us again soon. So wherever you are in the world, have a great day or have a great evening, and we look forward to having you on another webinar again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Joel.